sounds like a proper performance Subaru.
This thing is the Dominatrix of Impreza-based machines. I'm trying pretty hard to please it, and it just looks back and says, "Is that all you got?" Maybe that's why I love it. I'm John Cadogan from autoexpert.com.au, the place where Aussie new car buyers save thousands off their next new cars. Hit me up on the website for that, and make sure you watch all the way to the end. I'll drill down into the competitors, do a full analysis there, and break down the WRX STI model range for you as well. But for the time being, we're on the dirt and we're not coming unglued. I'm going to do what this car does best, which is throw it at a few bends and not crash. WRX STI is such a pure driving experience that only real drivers need apply. It's a hoot to drive it like you mean it, very satisfying, but hard work for ordinary driving in traffic. The classic performance car paradox. A replacement WRX STI is still more than 12 months away. So in the interim, Subaru has done what any self-respecting car maker would do, which would be tweak the bumpers and grille and also fit a bigger set of alloy wheels. So this WRX STI is riding on 19-inch alloys, the biggest alloys that have ever been factory fitted to a WRX STI. The easiest way to train spot the 2018 STI is the building site high-vis brake calipers. Not so sure that's a stylistic move forward, but it certainly is distinctive. Normally, these minor tweaks would be insufficient to motivate me to do a complete review on a car. However, when the very nice girl from Subaru rang the other day and said, "We'd really like to lend you one for a week to review," I thought, I don't want to be uncharitable here. And chivalry's not dead. I mean, after all, I had no wish whatsoever to hurt her feelings. The Powertrain is very satisfying, albeit aging and albeit outgrunted by some newer entrants. The peaks are 221 kilowatts at 6,000 RPM and 407 Newton meters at 4,000. A very healthy step up from non-STI WRXs, but you do have to feed it that 98 RON unleaded. This thing is just glued to the road on dirt. It's so satisfying to drive. The main story though is not the ultimate power and torque output. It is pretty impressive in the mid-range though. It's got the Volkswagen Golf R covered in the mid-range, but not quite the Ford Focus RS. All you've got to remember is, when you're having a good go, just keep the tacho between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM and you won't go far wrong. This car is the base model STI and it's unbelievably affordable given the sheer breadth of capability. You'll get it on the road for 55 grand here in Australia. I don't know how they do it for the money, but the ownership costs and operating costs could make your eyes water as well, in particular the insurance if you're a young bloke, so I'd be factoring that in before I sign my life away at the dealership. The servicing is expensive as well. That's going to be every 6 months in an environment where competitors have moved to 12. So you'll need to factor in about $700 or $800 every year for the first 3 years just for the standard service items. And remember also that this car demands 98 octane super premium unleaded, and the novelty of tipping the most expensive petrol down its gullet might wear off as well. But you need to do that if you know what's good for your engine. If there's a class of interior comfort called harsh comfortable, then this is it. It's a performance driving centric cabin arrangement, and it's poverty in the back seat. That's the only way to describe it. This car is not the place to shop for opulence, and obviously the interior was not where they spent the big bucks in R&D. Instead, they had a very serious conference call with Isaac Newton. You can delete the absurd towel rack for the princely sum of $300. I'd be doing that. But if you're young and dumb, maybe not. All it achieves in practice, you know, is to make you stand out in traffic like, "Officer,
look at me. Alternatively, you could just cut out the middleman and throw your license in the barbecue. It's been a couple of years since I last reviewed an STI, and I note with some relief that Subaru's badge gluing on department is still punching well above its weight with this car. No budgets clearly have been cut there.
There are badges on the front and the back, the brakes, the wheels, the mats, the scuff plates, the headrests, the steering wheel, the centre console, and I probably missed a couple.
Counting them is beyond the basic capacity for numeracy required by the Motoring Journalist's Code of Competency. In any case, the chance of you ever forgetting that your car is a WRX STI is still the same old minus 273 degrees C. I love this car. It's such a paradox though. It's a burden to drive in traffic, and it's not much fun on the way down the shops for the milk, the bread and the ammo. And then when you let it off the chain, it's better than you, and that is a wholly humbling experience. And if you find yourself driving it one day like a WRX STI, well, you probably shouldn't be driving like that on a public road. It's also a hard car to drive really well. If you're into that whole driving finesse thing, you know, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, then the WRX STI is a rolling, continuous driving self-improvement challenge. And if you don't know what any of that means, well, I'm pretty sure Toyota still makes the Yaris. So I'll be loading up the Bat Pumpy first thing tomorrow morning when this car is due to be returned to its rightful owners, and Subaru can have its damn WRX STI back again. But only when they prize it from my cold, dead fingers. Between then and now, I intend to remain here on location, having more than a little fun in Shitsville. And you can go back to the Fat Man, fresh from his jacuzzi full of cheerleaders, to talk competitors and spec.
Cletus Van Dam there, preparing once again for the Alamo. One man alone with just a banjo and, of course, the Bat Pumpy pitted against the forces of STI retrieving evil. One last stand. Very Butch. Correction, very Butch Cassidy, and that didn't end well either, if memory serves. It's always so traumatic giving back an icon like the STI. Frankly, it leaves indelible scars. But moving on. Is the STI the right performance car for you? It's a very hard question to answer, yet let us do that or die like Cletus in the attempt. There are three flavours of STI in the range: Poverty, Premium and Spec-dot-R. Poverty, which is a term Subaru does not actually use, is not all that hard to cop in reality. Standard items are cruise control, dual zone climate air conditioning, the full infotainment package, a 5.9-inch centre LCD and 8-speaker Harmon Kardon audio system. That's about 51 grand plus on-road costs. It's really just a life support system for the awesome Dominatrix driveline, basically. A Premium costs another $5,800, and for that you get a sunroof and you will sit on dead cow. Probably more than one when you think about it. Plus the electronic oversight stuff, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, front and side view monitors, stuff like that. You also get power adjustable heated seats, auto dimming rear view mirror. So that's the hard, fast version of incipient luxury, Dominatrix with a velvet glove in Premium. Spec-dot-R, well, that adds $1,750, and basically you get front Recaros plus 8-way power adjustment for the driver. But here, the Dominatrix giveth with one hand and taketh with the other. It's always the way, because the seat memory function is removed in Spec-dot-R. Now, this next bit of the report is for you if you are quivering at the dealership, poised to drop those big bucks on the horizontally opposed, symmetrically all-wheel driven, impossible to please mechanical mistress. The reality is that every drive will be a lesson about frustration and insatiability. And make no miscalculation here, you're the one in the latex gimp suit, and it is you who will be doing all the bootlicking. You can tell I've thought about this in extensive detail. I live my life below the belt in a dungeon. You always look at me like that's a bad thing. This is a harsh, draining car to drive, and it's wholly unpleasant in a mundane driving context. I mean, you're not going to wear the gimp suit down the shops, right? No one is going to do that unless they want to be on the news. But it is awesome to have a red-hot go in an STI, it really is. You will have a Cheshire Cat-style grin in that gimp suit, and I'd be lying if I said I did not scope exactly the right bend on exactly the right piece of gravel with plenty of runoff and nothing to hit, and crank up the centre diff, have a judicious lift in the middle of a corner, and then just dial it back straight ahead with the throttle. Very, very therapeutic. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned in this respect, and I would do it again on every day, ending in Y if the opportunity presented. Commit me to the pit of hell if you must. The STI is just designed for this stuff. It's temptation personified. And for all you social justice warriors who think it's unacceptable to do that, get back in your friggin' boxes. Do us all a favour. Hold your breath for 5 minutes. What's unacceptable is driving like that on a residential street. If you do it in the right location, well inside the control envelope, inside the limits of your own ability, it's no different to a helicopter pilot practicing an auto rotation, because one day the turbine is going to quit for real. So I guess there are about 3 factors to consider with you buying an STI, and the first one is entirely subjective. You just want one. Okay, understood, I get that. In that case, make friends with the Madam Lash reality. Otherwise, the underlying harshness and fatiguing demeanour of the STI might take the gloss off in the long term. The next factor is the car itself, and the third factor is you. In reality, the performance potential of an STI and its competitors is insanely high. So the key objective questions are you ever going to exploit that performance, and do you even have the ability to do that? Most people aren't, and most people don't. And for this reason alone, I strongly suggest everyone on the cusp of STI ownership have a good long look at WRX Premium, which still has outstanding limits, is very satisfying to drive and much more pleasant to use as a daily driver, especially the CVT. Objectively, many STI owners would be better suited to a standard WRX, but this is only when you take the bragging rights out of the equation. A WRX is a car, a WRX STI is an icon, and there is a huge difference subjectively. Most people do not have the ability to drive an STI like an STI, and there are very few opportunities to do that reasonably and safely out there in the real world. These opportunities are only ever occasional. Objectivity, so limiting. I say this in the spirit of you making a selection with your intellect as opposed to your reproductive organs, which, if you are a man, they do tend to be somewhat single-minded and often appear not to act overall on balance in one's long-term best interests. I think you'd agree. If you step down across whatever into WRX Premium CVT, you will save $2,000 compared with the poverty STI. You'll lose 24 kilowatts in peak power, but you'll get there 400 revs earlier, and the mid-range power delivery gap is not all that significant, and you'll get to run it on 95 octane unleaded instead of 98. But the big difference is WRX Premium is a superb daily driver. WRX CVT is not as quick to 100. 6.3 for the CVT, 6.0 for the manual, 5.2 for the STI. But I would tell you the CVT is amazingly responsive on the fly, and none of these cars is designed for drag racing. In terms of cornering and absolute limitations there, the STI rolls on 245/35s and the WRX 245/40s. And of course, There's the tweakable centre diff on the STI, but this is all just going to impact the way it feels at the limit or approaching, rather than the absolute amount of grip on offer. STI is sharper, certainly, but that also usually means less margin between grip and slip. It's hardly as if a standard WRX is unresponsive or unsatisfying. Some obvious competitors to consider. The Honda Civic Type R is the same price as the base STI. It lacks the all-wheel drive system, line ball on performance kind of thing. Looks absurd, like the kind of car James T. Kirk would drive here on Earth on shore leave. Fast, just as draining as the STI. If you're shopping for the right Dominatrix, I guess this is probably the closest competitor. It's impressive, but not that impressive in the context of a new Honda versus an aging STI. Honda's struggling in Australia too, which impacts everything about customer interaction with the brand. The Ford Focus RS, also line ball on price, more powerful, faster, has a longer service interval, and it runs on 95. This is a performance special with an incredible wall of mid-range power delivery, 440 newton metres from 1600 to 5000 revs. And yes, I did say power and quoted torque and revs. Before some alleged expert reaches for the keyboard indignantly, bad troll, this is because power equals torque times revs, times a fudge factor to get the units right. You look at the torque spec and the revs and it tells you everything you need to know about mid-range power if you can crack the kooky code of applied physics here. Unfortunately, the Focus RS is renowned for engine failures from catastrophic coolant loss, so much so that the top 3 predictive searches on Google for Focus RS engine are failure, recall and issues. For Golf R engine, it's specs, oil and for sale, and for WRX STI engine, it's for sale, specs and 2017. Remember, predictive search is a reflection about what online humanity is actually searching for. Engine failure, recalls and issues are the major causes for interest among Focus RS engine searches today, and that's got to tell you something. There's also Ford's legendary customer non-support to consider here. That awe-inspiring hubris in the boardroom, the default presumption of which is consumer law is optional, which it is, sadly, in Australia if you're a car maker with absolutely no moral compass. Moving on, the Volkswagen Golf R is not quite line ball with the STI on performance, but it is awfully close. A slightly less mid-range power at most revs, plus peak power 500 RPM higher and therefore slightly less accessible. Golf R is equivalent to STI on price, but like Ford, customer non-care at Volkswagen has been outsourced to the pit of hell. Beautiful car, let down by the people who make it and, here in Australia, also by the people who sell it. In comparison, Subaru's customer support is easily in the top 3 among the local car makers, and it's the single biggest difference between these two competitors and the Subaru. Of course, you can only experience this for yourself when your testicles are against the wall with your car and you actually need some high-level customer support. Here's a left-field alternative for you, the BMW M140i. It's $4,000 more than the STI Premium, but screamingly fast. And okay, it's not all-wheel drive, but there's a lot to love about a small rear driver with 250 kilowatts and insane, clinical, psychotic brake, crazy mid-range power delivery. Outstanding. 500 newton meters from 1520 to 4,500 revs. Torque and revs again, yes. Brain-bending mid-range power in that car. Here's a car that's not only faster, in some ways it might even be more fun, and it certainly flies a lot further under the radar. And then of course you could opt instead for a base model V6 twin-turbo Kia Stinger. And I know that's not a direct competitor either. It's faster than an STI to 100, 4.9 versus 5.2, so you'll need the video referee there. And you'll save a couple of grand over the base STI. The Stinger is heavier and has slightly less rubber on the road, and despite the twin hairdryers, it manages to run happily on 91 octane
that's wee by comparison. It's going to be a lot cheaper to own a Stinger. The Stinger is not the rally-inspired, whip-wielding dominatrix that the STI is, but it's a 50 grand car that I'd rather have as a daily driver. And if I were planning any long drives, that'd be the box I'd tick as well, unless you want to arrive, lashed and exhausted. I do believe that's all I have for you on this at the moment, but despite all these caveats, if you're still gagging for the GIMP suit, your new STI will be delighted to tell you how pathetic and inadequate you are, no matter how hard you strive to please it. If you have a refined car for regular use and the STI is a mere indulgence, I kind of get that. Driving an STI like you mean it, safely, prudently, but also making it perform as intended, is exactly that rolling self-improvement driving challenge Cletus said before the PR team at Subaru gunned him down 20 years past his prime. He always wanted to get on the news, that guy, and I kept telling him, it's just not that special. We can only hope he gets resurrected, perhaps like Jesus. Or perhaps actually resurrected. Hit me up via the website for more, including that save thousands thing I always threaten. Australia only though, sadly. I'm John Cadogan. Subscribe, I dare you. And thank you very much for watching.